So this one comes from the Financial Times, and I think it's a perfect way to sort of round out the week. So Northern England's murdered towns need more than Brexit. You know, we've only been saying it for quite a while on this channel. So the Conservative chances in the next UK election lie in offering hope to struggling communities. Cosset, a small town on the tip of the Pennines, is Britain's answer to Youngstown, Ohio. The US steel town, immortalized by Bruce Springsteen as a picture of an American failure, shrank rapidly after losing its mill in 1977 and has struggled to find and prosper ever since. Cosset was similarly murdered in 1980, according to longtime residents, when its vast steelworks were shut down and thousands lost their jobs. Now home to a slew of supermarkets and discount stores, this chilly corner of northern England remains a place that is lost in the reason to exist. In 2016, just as Youngstown voted for the US President Donald Trump, Cotton went strongly for Brexit. The town is also like the childhood home of David Skelton and his new book Little Platoons. And it digs deep into the challenges facing Britain's struggling towns and the trends that delivered Brexit, named after Edmund Burke's description of small communities. This manifesto against economic liberalism also poses the solution for these beleaguered places. Over a beer, Mr. Skelton explains he wrote the book at the time that people were briefly obsessed with left-behind voters and generally seemed interested in why people voted for Brexit. But after the initial fury of interest, when places like Cosset fleetingly appeared on news bulletins, it went back to the Westminster horse race, and we have forgotten again, he says. Little Platoons was written with Cosset in mind, and makes a case for rebalancing the British economy through state intervention, which isn't going to happen. The Conservative powers that be that are behind Brexit are completely 100% against any state intervention, and one of the reasons why there was such a strong backing for Brexit from them was because of the regulations that are in place in the EU. They do not want any type of regulation whatsoever. The force in his argument is abundantly clear. Charity shops and bookmakers vie with empty windows and fast food outlets. The town centre feels aimless. Yet all is not disheartening. The outskirts are full of shiny shops for motorists in brand new communities in the surrounding valleys. Cosset is not some kind of a post-industrial dystopia. There's other towns that are struggling more, Mr. Skelton says. But the problem here is a lack of empowered community. There aren't enough businesses in the town with jobs and that have the same level of pride that working in the steelworks did. His thesis can be described as conservative. So it's conservative communerationism. I think that's how you say it. He values the community ethos above ever-increasing growth, but twins that view with the enthusiasm for private enterprise. In Skelton's view, politicians of all stripes have let these communities down, and Labour has left the devalued parties the traditional heartland, while the Conservatives have placed too much faith in free market capitalism. The way forward, Mr. Skelton says, is rooted in lower levels of controlled migration, encouraging local residents to stay in their homelands. His book calls for governments to hand down political powers aimed at helping individuals' communities make up for decades of neglect. So that's not for, shall we say, outside of migration. He's calling for local migration, as in don't leave your town to go to the cities. So places like Cosset need devolution and investment to give people a much greater say in their own lives, he argues. He wants to create what he calls prosperity hubs by giving towns a greater powers to raise finance and attract capital. The communities could then become centres for specific industries and great vocational institutions. As Britain veers towards another elections, these ideas could become increasingly relevant. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is betting that Brexit is tearing up the UK electoral map. He believes that he has the promise to pull the UK out of the EU, and it will overcome decades of apathy towards the Tory party, who are blamed for such towns for destroying jobs. That ain't going to happen. I tell you now, as a resident of Barnsley and knowing the people of Barnsley, they will never, ever vote Conservative. Why? Because they destroyed the town. Why would they ever put their faith in the Conservative Party again? It's simply not going to happen. And to do it, by the way, to actually really win, because this is actual, because someone's going to ask, well, what would make them do it? So I'll answer this question. So for them to actually do it, they would actually have to properly invest in these towns, and I'm talking Northern powerhouse ideas. Which again, if it got off the ground and actually did good work, then the Tories could go back to these communities and say, look at the good work we did. Look what, Labour couldn't restore your town, but we did. And they have to do this under the proviso that they aren't going to win in these towns, and that their policies are not going to be as attractive to their traditional heartlands. But they are never going to do that. It's too risky for them, even for Johnson to do. But Mr. Skelton disagreed. He goes into places like the Steel Club in Cosset, and they're still talking about the Tory past in a very negative way, he says. The Tories aren't going to win an election without these towns. We're talking about a campaign by Boris Johnson, and it has to be about Brexit, but also about a transformative economic agenda for Cosset and places like it. Not going to happen, as I've just said. Even the guy he's interviewing agrees with me on that one. The anger of overlooked English towns like Cosset helped propel Leave to victory in the EU referendum 3 years ago, but politicians have not addressed the decades of careless failure that produced such pent-up fury. Cosset adjusted to its new reality 4 decades ago. Westminster must do the same. And I sort of agree in this a way, and there's often this thing of, oh, Westminster's in a bubble, but it's not really in a bubble. The problem is that a lot of the MPs who do go into the town very often don't get into the positions to do what they want with their party. And one of the things that you have to really do, regardless of whether Brexit happens or not, people must become more politically active. They must learn to understand what is going on in Westminster, what is going on in their party, who is standing for elections in their party, and who is standing for elections in their local town and constituency. And for them, they've got to really understand. And that just isn't happening. And that is really a failure on national media and sometimes local media. There used to be in the Barnsley Chronicle a great weekly write-up of what was happening in the local town council and the local town council meeting. That just doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't existed for about 10 years. And you wonder why people don't have any idea of what's going on, because they don't go to their local council meetings. The local council meeting is regularly, I think it's the highest attendance they've ever had was 8. 8 people not involved in that town council meeting. 8 people. It's just goes to show. There needs to be a proper political reawakening, and Brexit is not going to solve the problems for many of these people who voted to leave. It is just going to exasperate them even more. And if you thought they were angry now voting for leave, then Brexiteers, I've got another message for you. If you think that you are somehow going to win over these people, you're not. You've got to do everything against what you campaigned against to be able to win them over, because you ain't going to win them over with what these guys are now promising, especially in the Brexit party. You ain't going to win them over. not in the numbers you need to win.